What's up, Murder Mind family? All right, so I'm looking at the chat and I got, wow, Rio de Janeiro, Akron, Cali, DMV. Thank you guys so much. This is our inaugural live. Just so you know, I have an earpiece in, I have my producer in my ear. Couldn't do this without him, and all of the crazy graphics and music and all that good stuff you hear on the show is from my producer Sedge Turson. So I want to first thank him for coming on this journey with me. So thank you guys for joining us today's Wednesday. Wednesday night at 7. We're gonna get into this crazy serial killer case, but before we do that, lots of questions. When we first started this series, so many people were asking questions about, okay, why can't we just get this story in one episode? Many of you have seen, or some of you may have seen, this case, the serial killer next door case, by another name, on another network and in another show. So let's explain how that worked. So yes, I had a couple shows on TV, on network TV. This particular case was, profiled on the show, but for a 1 hour show, that's really 42 minutes to give you guys an entire case that took me 2 years to investigate. So when we started this series, what we wanted to do is we wanted to serialize every case that we do in this show to show you guys every little thing, or as much as every little thing that I went through solving these cases. I want you guys to really feel what I went through, what I experienced, what I smelled. And if you could remember, I think on the last episode of the new case, Deadly Secrets, I talked about reaching out to the cold case detective the original detective that originally had that case to get his visceral feelings. So that's kind of the idea of this series, is to bring you guys along with me on this ride as I, investigated this case, to give you all the details, all the nuances that were going on at the time that I had to investigate this case. So there's that. So we're going to continue to serialize this case, and I'm sorry for the people who want it all in one, sitting. We're going to give you a little bit at a time, but you're going to get everything. You're going to hear the whole story, and if you've seen this case before, you're going to see stuff you've never seen before. So this was a crazy case. This was 11 episodes. We took you guys on this crazy ride for our premiere case for the Murder Mind show. And it was crazy, but we still didn't give you everything. Otherwise, we would have had maybe 15, 16 episodes. You guys would have been screaming at me. You would have been like, enough already. But I hear you. We heard you. But we're going to get into kind of like some details about this particular case that we may not have covered, completely on the series. So, all right, let's talk about the day that I got this call. It was November. It was cold outside, and if you recall, I got the call sometime around 8:30, 9 o'clock at night. And one of the things I didn't talk about on this case is what I felt and heard when I first pulled up in front of the McGuire residence. So, if you recall, the McGuires had a dog. The dog's name was Samson. Samson was in a pen in the backyard. But one of the things, if you could imagine, pulling up in my Ford Taurus, my windows are up because it's cold outside, didn't have the radio on, but before I even parked the car, I could hear the dog barking. But other than the dog, it was eerily silent. So it was crazy for me because I just sat in my car and I'm just, at this point, don't know what the dog has to do with anything. And in fact, I didn't even think the dog was at that property. I thought it was a neighbor's dog. I didn't know anything other than there was a homeowner found in the backyard, shot and killed. So, of course, as I get out of the car, it's crisp, it's cold, it's eerily quiet, other than this dog barking, crazily barking. And as I started to go down the driveway, I can start to hear it getting louder. And I know now, okay, this dog is in the backyard. So when I got there, of course, you've already seen, me detailing exactly what I saw. So when this victim is laying there, the next thing that really stood out to me was the cup of ice. that told me right there that this case, that this murder was pretty much fresh. The dog's name was Samson. I met the first responding officer. We started talking about what was going on, what he found, who called 911. And of course, as you already know, the wife came home and found her husband there. Now, you guys are junior sleuths, and you know we always look at the spouse. Now, you know, there's a saying, look at somebody cross-eyed. Like, I wasn't really looking at her cross-eyed. She was appropriately grieving, but you know what? I've been tricked before. So I had to treat her with kid gloves. But as I got to start talking to this victim's wife, although I had to go through all of the processes of trying to vet her out, find out where she was, get a timeline together, my gut was telling me something. My gut was telling me, like, this is probably not where I'm going. This is not the direction I'm going in. So as you remember, we took the wife to Homicide, and, you know, I treated her just like a grieving widow. So we got that piece done. Now, here's what's interesting. So this particular case, you know, in this particular neighborhood, I didn't really get a lot of calls here. Like, I had homicides maybe a mile away or so. It wasn't really a neighborhood that I felt like, you know, I should obviously be in. These homes are well maintained, you know, very well priced, manicured lawns. So, you know, of course I'm thinking, okay, this is probably a robbery. But of course, who comes on scene, who comes into the picture right away is like, who's missing from this is, you know who? Who's our favorite guy? Bill Davis. So let's go down the encounter with Bill Davis. So now I remember Mrs. McGuire telling me, hey, my husband was here with our handyman, Bill Davis. He was the last person I saw with my husband. Of course, he's not on scene when I get there. Where is he? Now, if you remember, excuse me, if you remember, uniform officers had already went down the street to do a neighborhood canvass and knocked on his door. Didn't know that. I went to Bill's house directly because they told me where he lived. It was literally 3 houses down. And if you remember, when I knocked on his door, I don't know if you recall this in one of the early episodes, if you could picture a door with 2 pieces of panes of glass on each side, as I'm peeking through the side, I see what appears to me to be an elderly black male, and he's just staring at me. And I'm banging on the door, and he's staring at me, and I'm literally like, you know, my man, like, hello. And he won't come to the door. And I'm like, okay, this is very strange, very strange. So finally, as you've seen before, Mrs. Sims, the elderly lady that lived with Bill, comes to the door. She answers the door. She actually asked me to step inside, and then Bill walks up, and we start having this conversation. So that, if you recall, was my very first introduction to Bill. That was where that cat and mouse game, as you recall, through 11 episodes, began. Unbeknownst to me, I'm just attributing to maybe he's elderly, you know, maybe he's tired, he was getting ready for bed, he didn't want to be bothered, but something just didn't feel right. So, as you recall, I want to go way back or way forward in the investigation when I start to uncover the 1998 murder of Alfred Glass, the man that lived across the street. If you remember that, I reached out to that original detective. And when I reached out to that detective, he was now in the FBI. He told me when he knocked on Bill Davis's door, he did the exact same thing in 1998. He saw him through the side glass. He wouldn't come to the door. So Bill Davis has been kind of acting in this fashion, you know, his entire life, so to speak. So, of course, you remember in 1986, what happened? He killed Kenneth Ellis, who was actually living in the house with him. So now Bill and I, we start on this journey, and this is where it really gets a little funny, okay? That was my first encounter with Bill. I processed the crime scene. You guys have seen it. You know what I did. Collected evidence. I'm still trying to figure things out. I'm kind of suspicious of Bill, but I'm still haven't vetted the wife out all the way. I know the wife had ex-husbands. All these things are going through my head. I have all these to-do lists. I'm like in my head. I'm writing things down. But I need to come back to Bill, right? So I start to reach back out to Bill in the coming days. And what I start to realize is I was told Bill is hard of hearing, And what I start really realizing is Bill is more hard of hearing when I started asking Bill tough questions. So imagine, like, hey, Bill, how you doing today? And he's like, oh, I'm very good, detective. And then I'm like, look, I really want to talk about what happened that day Mr. McGuire was killed. You know, let's have a seat in my car and let's talk about it. Like, okay, so you left at 6? And he would say, huh? So I'm trying to lock him in on a timeline. I'm trying to establish a timeline. And he won't lock in with me right away because he is playing, and I'm literally sitting in my car with him. So imagine how hard is it for you to hear me if I'm sitting literally inches away from you. So now I'm starting to realize, okay, I got my work cut out for me with this guy, Bill. But I'm still looking at other things. I'm looking at robberies. You know, there were some robberies, maybe, quarter of a mile away. There were some home burglaries. There were some things that could have produced some alternative suspects. But I just, the same gut feeling that I had where I felt the wife had nothing to do with it. It's the same gut feeling that kept pulling me into Bill. So now Bill and I, we build this relationship, right? So imagine you meet somebody and you just think they're cool, right? I don't know. Where do you meet people? You're at Starbucks, you meet somebody, could be, someone who's a parent at your son's softball team. You never talk to them. You strike up a conversation with them, and all of a sudden you think they're pretty cool. And you start building this friendship. Well, that's exactly what happened with Bill. Bill and I started becoming friends because I knew at some point, right, I had to start asking Bill questions and either cross him off my list and move in another direction or continue to build this case. So as Bill and I continued down this path, and remember, this was a 2-year investigation. Bill and I had so many conversations. You guys heard it. If you members, you got to actually, you got I think it's the detective sergeant member. You guys got the entire maybe 3 hours of different conversations I had with Bill. There were some other ones. And you're going to love this. So imagine I'm working this case. Time has gone by. And you get a call. I'm a homicide detective, and I get a call from my suspect. And he asked me a question. Okay. The question was, hey, detective, I'm just calling to see how you're doing. And I'm like, I'm doing great, Bill. What do you need? He's like, no, I just checking on you. I was worried, hoping you're doing all right. And I am like, okay, Bill, I'm doing great. Now, in my mind, I'm like, okay, is this guy trying to get in my head? He's trying to get information, never asked one question, never said anything about anything other than to ask me how I'm doing. And it was at that moment where I realized, okay, this guy's playing games. And I got to really turn this thing around. So with that said, Bill and I had this crazy case of interactions where, if you remember, where I just pop up at his house and I'll talk to him. And at some point, it culminated into this one experience, and you may remember this, where I went to his house to speak to him. And this is because Bill called me, by the way. Remember, I would call Bill just to, shoot the shit with him and just ask him questions and maybe get a piece of information. Like, hey, Bill, by the way, like, okay, when you were at the McGuire house, it was what was it, 6:30? Really, it was 6 o'clock. I'm trying to see what he'd say. See if he slipped up in his statement. And this particular day, he calls me to come to his house. Now, this was the scariest encounter I've ever had with Bill. All right. And we're going to talk about two things. One I'm going to get into in a minute is, why was I by myself? I've had a lot of questions about that. Some of you who have watched some of my other shows know that I had a homicide partner, David Quinn. Guy's my brother. Like, literally, if he needed my right leg, I would cut it off for him. Nothing but love for him. But this was a different type of investigation. At the same time I'm investigating this case, I'm also investigating a multitude of other cases, as well as my partner has other cases, and we're intertwining with our cases, trying to find time to fit all this in. But it was a conscious effort to basically hit Bill myself alone, and it was a relationship building exercise. Everything I did was in a mode of safety until that day that I'm sitting in his kitchen. And if you recall, Bill is chopping greens. and his back is to me. Now, I am not a movie producer, and I'm not that creative. Like, I don't know if I could write a story that's fictional. It would be horrible. But I've seen plenty of movies, and this was like a scene right out of a movie. His back is to me. He's looking out the window that's right over the sink. There's a cutting board on there, and he's staring out of the window as he's cutting greens. And this is the moment where I decided to put all the cards on the table. And I basically said, Bill, like, why don't you just tell me what you did? Tell me how you killed these men. And that was the moment, if you recall, that Bill just froze and stopped cutting the vegetables and was just staring out of the window. And I'm like, Bill, are you there? And by the way, he was saying some crazy things about, he's tired, kind of wants to end it all. And at that moment, I'm thinking, okay, this knife is about this big. There's about 8 feet between me and Bill. I'm sitting down. I'm at a disadvantage. His side carport door is at my back. Now, I can get out of here quickly, but I don't know if I can do it in time to not get stabbed. So I literally leaned back, pushed my chair back, pulled my jacket back, and literally was pulling my gun out in a what's called a low ready position. And I didn't want to overreact, but I also wanted to be safe. And at any moment, I thought Bill was just going to turn around with that knife and come at me, and I would have to do what I'm trained to do. And I'm so thankful that after what seemed to be like 5 or 10 minutes, and that's quite an exaggeration, which was literally maybe 10 or 15 seconds of absolute stillness and silence. And that's a long time if you think about that. Bill just goes back to cutting vegetables and said something that was completely eerie, and just said, "Detective, you just need to do your job." And like literally like goosebumps. Even thinking about it right now, I still get goosebumps. And that was probably the scariest moment. That was kind of towards the end of the investigation. So I'm saying all that to say is the 2 years from the minute I stepped on the McGuire scene to I put handcuffs on Bill Davis, literally it was almost 2 years to the day that Mr. McGuire was killed. It was November of 2000, I believe, 9 when I arrested Bill Davis. We had all these encounters. And it was a relationship building exercise. A little unorthodox. If there are people who are in law enforcement that watch this show and hear what I'm saying right now, they probably would disagree with that. But at that point, I had been in homicide a number of years, 7 years. When I started in the year 2000, Atlanta was experiencing an influx in homicides, upwards of over 200 murders a year. I started with at least 10 to 15 homicides per year per investigator in our unit. So do the math. That was a lot of murders I had under my belt. Now, I wasn't the most experienced detective in the world, but I am known for thinking outside the box. So is my partner, David Quinn. So that was the plan. Everybody knew what I was doing. Everyone knew where I was at any given moment. My partner knew. My bosses knew. I was on the radio. They knew exactly where I was. So I felt somewhat in a sense of control, but uncontrollably cautious, if that makes any sense. So that really explains kind of like the navigation I was with Bill for 2 years. So talking about thinking outside the box. All right. So now I'm really thinking, okay, I'm collecting evidence. I'm trying to figure out how Bill is connected to this. One of the things that we didn't cover in the series, because it didn't prove fruitful. It didn't bring forth any evidence. But one of the things we did was I got a court order, and this is before Warren Williams was killed. This is the second victim in 2008. I got a court order to put a GPS tracker under Bill's car. Now, what that means is that's a Fourth Amendment issue. You have a right to privacy. You have a right not to be tracked. And there's got to be some type of evidence, which is called probable cause, that a judge would agree that, hey, this warrants, there's enough probable cause and evidence for me to allow you to put this tracker under his car. Now, I didn't put the tracker under his car, okay? I'm not the guys that do that. So we have a department of guys who are like super ninjas. They wear black. Even when they're off duty, they wear black. I don't know why, but they're just really good at what they do. And they sneak around at night and they hide behind trees and they crawl on their elbows with this GPS tracker. And somewhere in the middle of the night, this GPS tracker went on Bill's car November 27th, 2007. It's literally less than 2 weeks after Mr. McGuire's killed. Because what I'm thinking, if Bill is my suspect, right, if I could put this tracker under his car, and mind you, this is not a live tracker. This is kind of like an evidence building tracker. I'm not able to track it live. What I'm able to do is, if someone else were to turn up dead, we can then remove the tracker, download that data, and then see if his car with the GPS tracker matched up to any future potential crime scenes. Well, nothing happened. Okay, it was uneventful. So that tracker was on his car until January 15th, 2008. Okay, so the court order is for a limited amount of time. It's not unlimited. Also, there's batteries that have to be changed out. But that was what the court order was for 45, 50 days. And then it had to be removed. So these same ninjas that work for us, we call them our intelligence guys, they snuck back in, they took the tracker off. And now I'm still trying to collect evidence. Now, get this. That's January 15th, 2008. So from January 15th, 2008, all the way to August 6th, 2008, I'm still showing up at Bill's house. I'm still having coffee with him. I'm still on the phone with him talking. I'm still just driving around, just trying to get some more evidence, looking at phone records, looking at whether or not he really played the lottery, trying to get the lottery ticket numbers. And of course, as you recall from the series, did some search warrants at his house. Now, we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But now we're at August 6, 2008, and Warren Williams is killed. So now this is 7 months after we took the tracker off his car. Now, I had no idea if he would kill again, or if he really was the killer, and when that would happen if he was the killer. And, that's just the way homicide investigations work. So now I've got another case on my hand. So right away, if you recall in one of the episodes, I got a call from a homicide sergeant. Now, right off the bat, that wasn't my case. And the way that works is this. In homicide, you're in a rotation. So I caught the McGuire murder in November of 2007. That means the detective behind me in the rotation gets the next case, and so on and so on. So now, by August of 2008, a new detective is up in the rotation and catches this case. But luckily, one of the homicide sergeants that was with me on the McGuire crime scene responded with this detective that's now assigned this new case in August of 2008 and sees this victim. And what he really keys in on is this victim, Warren Williams, now found at Verbena Street, not far from the McGuire residence. He sees that he's shot once in the chest and once in the face. So he calls me and says, "Hey, V, you're not going to believe this. This guy's literally 0.2 of a mile from your crime scene back in November, and he shot once in the chest and once in the face." And I said, "Okay, what does that really mean? Like, there's probably a lot of people out there shot in the chest and the face." He goes, "You're not listening." He goes, "Did you hear the part where I said where he lived?" And I must have missed it. And I said, "No, tell me, what are you talking about?" He said, "He lives directly behind Bill Davis's house." I said, "Come on, you got to be kidding me." It was Bill Davis's neighbor, the guy that shared a fence line in his backyard. This is Warren Williams' backyard. They share a fence line. It's his neighbor. So now I'm like, wait a minute. Okay, I give everybody a fair shake. And I'm like, you know what? There could be a reasonable answer for this, because now I've got to take this case from this new detective. I say, "Hey man, go pull a cold case. I got this." And I got to start trying to reverse engineer this to see if there's any motive, suspects, anything with this new victim, Warren Williams, that may shed some light on his murder. And I couldn't find anything. Nothing. No bad blood with anybody. He wasn't robbed. Remember, McGuire, later on we determined that he really wasn't robbed. His necklace was taken. I think that was taken to throw me off. And the gunshot wounds were identical. Okay? Now comes in the ballistics. Later on, as you remember, once we pulled the slugs out of Warren Williams and compared them to the slugs of Dennis McGuire, the crime lab determined that both of those homicides were absolutely those people were killed with the same gun. So now I know both of those murders are linked. I got one perpetrator, likely one perpetrator, using the same weapon to kill two people who live literally yards apart. And who's in the middle of that is Bill Davis. Now, some may say, hey, that could just be a crazy coincidence. You know what? It could. I've seen crazier things. But as you know, and if you've seen this case, we continue down the road. So let's talk about what else we did. So now I know I'm really looking at Bill Davis. Now I'm looking at him sideways. Okay, this is the sideways look, because now not only have we been playing this cat and mouse, not only have we been playing tag, calling me calling him meeting me. Now I know there's two murders linked to the same gun, and Bill seems to be in the middle of everything. The GPS didn't work. So what you didn't see in the series is one other thing I did, thinking outside the box, was I put a pole cam up. So I can't really tell you how that works. That's kind of like that super secret sauce stuff that detectives do. We get assistance from outside agencies and even some civilian partners to do that. So I can't get into the details of how that's done. But I had a pole cam up in front of Bill's house, and I could actually live monitor him. So from my laptop, I would actually watch Bill. The only issue with that, it was not something that could be recorded. The technology wasn't there at that time. It was just a live view. But my laptop was constantly open anytime I was in the office or somewhere with Wi-Fi, even in 2007. And I was watching. I could see Bill mowing his grass. I could see when Bill was coming and going in his car. Now, mind you, like, I'm now investigating not just the murder of Dennis McGuire, but I'm investigating the murder of Warren Williams. And one of the things that I could see clearly is Bill was very active with his vehicle. And if you remember, when I started really investigating the murder of Warren Williams, I interviewed his cousin, who basically said on the night the night before Warren Williams was killed, a strange man arrived at their house, knocking on the door, looking for her cousin Warren, this victim. And when she described him, she said it was somebody she didn't recognize. His hat was pulled down intentionally as if he was concealing his face. She said he disguised his voice, asked for her cousin who wasn't home, and then left. And then added the last caveat. The caveat being, when he drove away, his car had a loud muffler. Of course, so many times as I've driven to Bill's house and actually waited for him to come in, drive in, his car had a loud muffler. So this is as we start building this circumstantial case. Okay, and that's how we do it. This isn't a case where I felt Bill was ever going to tell me I did it. And in fact, the closest he ever came was that encounter in his kitchen where he says, "Detective, you better just do your job." Now, what innocent man says that? If you're coming at me for a murder that I didn't commit, that's the last thing I'm going to say. I'm going to say you got the wrong guy. But nevertheless, these are some of the things that we did that we didn't detail inside the series. So, all right, so we talked about that. Now, here's something that's really interesting. All right, 1998, Alfred Glass is killed. He's the guy, if you remember, lived across the street from Bill Davis. The type of weapon that was used was a Taurus or a Smith & Wesson 38 and a 22. So he was shot twice with two different guns. Now, in 1998, the working theory was that perhaps he got robbed in his carport. There were two assailants. One had a 38, one had a 22. And that's a really good theory, because if that's all you had and there's no other murders that you're thinking about connecting that case to, that's a really good working theory. But now fast forward, we now have another murder of a neighbor of Bill Davis down the street, and now a murder for the neighbor that lives behind him. Remember, the ballistics from the McGuire murder and the ballistics from the Warren Williams murder matched. So of course, because Alfred Glass was killed also with a 38, I had that slug examined by our crime lab. And I'm hoping that they are now going to be able to say that it's a match. Well, they couldn't conclusively do that because in 1998, that bullet has been sitting in storage for so many years. The bullet itself taken from Glass was corroded. So, of course, now Fast forward to when we actually find the gun. If you remember in one of the episodes, the neighbor next door to Bill, right to his left, was digging around in her yard, hit something hard, moved the dirt around, found a Smith & Wesson .38 revolver buried, wrapped in tinfoil plastic in her yard. So let's take a look at that. I'll show you the gun. All right. Now, if you remember, there's the tinfoil. You can't see my cursor, but you can see the tinfoil and you can see corrosion. If you look closely at the barrel of the gun, on the outside, it's corroded. So that tells us that there's corrosion all over the gun, including inside the barrel. And as you can see, it's got corrosion all over it. So with that said, one of the things that I wanted to do, I've already had the slugs compared from Alfred Glass. They can't match them to Dennis McGuire. They can't match them to Warren Williams, but they're not saying no. They're just not saying yes. So I'm not giving up. I have the gun now. I send the gun to the crime lab, and now I said, test fire this weapon. Of course, again, you've already test fired it once and compared it to the McGuire murder and the Williams murder. You said it's a match. Now I want you to test fire it again. I want you to compare it to the slug taken from Alfred Glass in 1998. Our crime lab came back and said it's inconclusive, and the reason why is because the barrel of the gun, the inside of a barrel of a gun, has lands and grooves. So when a bullet comes out, the markings inside that barrel leave their striations on the projectile, and that's what they compare to another time they test fire the same weapon. Now here's why it didn't work. In 1998, that gun was fired. It was likely in pristine condition. Remember, that gun was stolen from a Fulton County Sheriff's deputy close in time to the Glass murder. So that gun was clean. It was in pristine shape. It belonged to a law enforcement officer. So when that bullet was fired, it was fired through a very clean, non-corroded gun. So now they're trying to now test fire a gun that has suffered corrosion inside the barrel. And now the striations and all of those lands and grooves are going to be different from 1998 because of the corrosion. However, it's going to be the same because the gun was used in the McGuire murder and the Williams murder close in time. So both of those weapons now are identically having the same corroded striations, lands, and grooves. That's why they matched, and that's why they didn't match the Glass murder from 1998. But I wasn't satisfied. Here's what you didn't see in the episode. Through my years working in homicide, I was able to identify a world-renowned firearms expert that actually lived in Philadelphia. So I myself got on a plane and flew this gun. I mean, not on me, obviously. I checked the gun under the plane. And I brought this gun to Philadelphia, and I left it in these most capable hands, and it had nothing but hope that something good would come from this. So fast forward a month after taking this gun to this renowned firearms expert, he gives me a call and he's like, V, listen, I wanna tell you it's a match, but the problem is I can't disagree with your crime lab because of the fact that the barrel is so corroded. Now, I'm no firearms examiner. I've seen plenty of comparisons, and maybe there's somebody watching this that is a firearms examiner. I don't know. But let's take a look. I'm going to show you, and you can see for yourself what this looks like. Now, if you look at this photo, the photo on the right, it's a split screen, is actually the bullet that was test fired. The photo on the left is the slug, the 38 caliber slug that was removed from Alfred Glass in 1998. This is the comparison done by the Philadelphia Firearms Examiner. Now, as a layperson, what you're looking at, if you see the lines that match up from one end, if you see the line going down the middle of each side of the split screen, that's identifying two different projectiles. And you can actually see where the striations and the lines match up. The problem is they didn't line up enough for that firearms examiner to say conclusively and testify in court that it was a match. I knew in my heart, I knew in my gut that what you're looking at right here was actually a match to the 1998 homicide of Alfred Glass. And that's the reason why when I arrested Bill Davis, he wasn't charged with the Glass murder. Had we had a positive 100% confirmation match from either our crime lab or the Philadelphia Firearms Examiner, I would have also charged him with the 1998 murder. We're going to get into, at the end of this, I'm going to give you a list. We're just going to go down the whole gamut of all the evidence against Bill Davis. And you're going to see that how every little piece of circumstantial evidence fits to show you a puzzle. Now, imagine, I don't know if you have ever assembled a puzzle. You get a box and you know what the picture is supposed to look like. You can see it on the cover of the box. And you start putting a puzzle together. And you're looking at it, you know, you have all these pieces together. Let's just say it's a sailboat on the water. You see the water, you see some waves, you see a mast, you see the sail, you see some birds in the distance, and you step back, but you realize as you're looking at this puzzle, you're missing 15 to 20 pieces of it. Can you still look at the puzzle and determine that what you're looking at is a sailboat on the water? The argument that I give is absolutely. And that's what circumstantial evidence is. And that's really what I was dealing with in building this case. Some physical evidence, the gun matching, that's physical evidence. Some eyewitness or ear witness hearing gunshots, establishing a timeline. It's really good evidence. So now that was the firearms piece that connected Bill Davis, in my opinion, to the murder across the street. And I'm going to really go down this list. So remember, we've already got, in my opinion, firearms that match that murder. I'm going to talk about some other evidence in a minute that kind of ties that in. But here's where it's going to get really good. Okay, what you didn't hear in this case was there was another murder. That's right. So let's just go down, let's do a roll call real quick. Start with 1986. Bill Davis kills Kenneth Ellis in the house that he's sharing with Nellie Sims. Goes to prison, gets out early, moves back into the location. In 1998, Alfred Glass is killed across the street. 2007, McGuire is killed. That's November of 2007. Mr. McGuire is killed 2 or 3 houses down. And then about 7 months later, Warren Williams, who lives right behind Bill Davis, is killed nearby. But what we didn't showcase is another homicide. Where Bill Davis lived, not the neighbor where the gun was found next door, but the other side of his house. We're going to call him John Doe. This is still an open case. I'm not going to identify him, so we'll call him John Doe. He was also killed in April of 2007. 7 months, 6 or 7 months before Dennis McGuire was killed. Now, what are the circumstances of that case? Now, John Doe lived right next door to Bill Davis. On April 20th, 2007, he shot twice in the head, twice in the chest. That sound familiar? That's called signature. Alfred Glass, chest and face, chest and head. Warren Williams, chest and face. Dennis McGuire, chest and face. And now you have a new victim that you didn't know about. April of 2007, John Doe, shot in the head and shot in the chest. He was also stabbed. So this is where it gets a little interesting. He was stabbed, but if you recall, the weapon I said that was used to kill Alfred Glass, 2 weapons. Remember I said a 38 and a 22. It was determined the 22 weapon used to kill Alfred Glass was an RG-22 model. Well, April 2007, this John Doe victim was stabbed and shot with an RG-22 caliber revolver. Same type of weapon used to kill Alfred Glass. So when we look at that, I have to look at that investigation separately as a cold case. Well, what I found was that during that investigation, that detective on that particular case actually interviewed Bill Davis, who admitted that he saw the victim that day, the day that he was killed, on his front porch. It was later determined through the investigation by this particular victim's wife, John Doe's wife, that Bill Davis would borrow lawn equipment from this John Doe victim. He was a landscaper. No real bad blood, but according to the wife, they were weary of Bill Davis. Now, does that sound familiar? Do you remember, if you recall, the episode where we start talking to Alfred Glass's daughter, and Alfred Glass and his wife and family were weary of Bill Davis? This is the same MO that's coming forward. So he admits to seeing him on the day that this victim is killed, and actually places himself near the crime scene. So here's where it gets kind of tricky. He wasn't killed at his home right next door to Bill Davis. He was actually killed 2 doors down from, guess who? Dennis McGuire. That's right. He's working on a house 2 doors down from Dennis McGuire in April of 2007. A whole 7 months before McGuire himself ends up getting murdered. He's found in the front yard. He's stabbed, he's shot. He's got stab wounds in his arms, likely defensive wounds. Likely he's fighting this assailant. He goes down, he's stabbed a few more times, and then he's shot and killed with the .22. So what I want to do is to really put this in perspective. Here's what I want to show you. All right. So first of all, this is the front yard of where this John Doe was killed. We can't show you, obviously, the wounds. We want to keep that private. But then here's an aerial map, right? And this is going to blow you away. I want you to take a look at that. At the center of that map, you're going to see suspect Bill Davis lived here. If you look right across the street, you'll see victim Alfred Glass was killed at his home. Right next door, you're going to see victim John Doe. That's where he lived. Right behind Bill Davis's house, you're going to see victim Warren Williams, where he lived. And if you look at the very bottom of the screen, you're going to see where the weapon was found, buried literally just over the fence line of Bill Davis's front yard. Now, if you go to the top, you're going to see where Mr. McGuire was killed. The very top of the screen, towards the left, and then on the right, you're going to see 2 houses down. That's where victim John Doe was killed. But I'm going to show you a little thing. We got to get Warren Williams, the victim that lived behind him. We need to get him in view of this thing. So if you look at this map, all of the blue dots in the middle are all the blue dots I just showed you. If you look at the upper right-hand corner of this graphic, that's exactly where victim Warren Williams was killed. It may look far from those other homes and all the other activity that was going around Bill Davis's house. That's literally 0.2 of a mile. You could walk that and get there in less than 20 minutes. So all of this geographically was connected to the area. All of this geographically was connected to the area. It was connected to Bill Davis. And that kind of puts it in perspective. So what I want to do right now is I want to kind of go down the evidence, okay? I want to just kind of give you a summation. And this isn't everything. This is not the minutia of evidence, but this is really going to bring it all together for you, okay? So let's start with the McGuire crime scene. Bill Davis was at that crime scene minutes prior to the gunshots being heard by a neighbor. By his own admission, he walked back to the McGuire residence at the time the neighbor heard the gunshots. So Bill himself puts himself at the crime scene at the time the gunshots were heard. The McGuire neighbor reported hearing loud talking, very loud talking. If you remember, I think it was the second episode, Mrs. McGuire indicated that her husband would have to talk loudly to Bill because of his hearing. So that may explain why that neighbor heard loud talking. So remember, Davis was convicted of killing someone in 1986, Kenneth Ellis. And now the dog. Let's talk about Sampson, okay? Nobody heard the dog barking when the loud talking was going on. The neighbor never heard that. But what we covered, and you may have missed this in the episode, but one time the McGuires, or 2 times the McGuires went out of town, and they actually, because Bill was kind of like their handyman, used him to care for their German Shepherd Sampson in the pen. He would come by, feed him, give him water, so he was familiar with the dog. That would explain why the dog wasn't barking, because there was a stranger there. And Mrs. McGuire confirmed, had it been a stranger, Sampson would have been going crazy. But there was no barking. Okay. So now, let's talk about the Glass murder. He lived right across the street from Alfred Glass. He lived right next to right next to John Doe, who was killed in April 2007. He had a bad relationship with the Glass family. And then Glass reported in 1998 that Davis was seen coming from their carport the day before Alfred Glass was killed. Crazy. Now, you may have missed this in an episode. This was reported in 1998, and again, I found this same witness who said the exact same thing she said in 98. This is a neighbor who actually heard the gunshots in 98 when Alfred Glass was killed. Looks out of her window, sees someone running away from the Glass carport in the direction into the yard of Bill Davis. Why would anyone be running that way unless they were trying to get home? Now, Glass was shot in the forehead and the chest. McGuire was shot in the eye and the chest. John Doe was shot in the chest and the head. Glass was shot with a .22 caliber and a .38 caliber gun. McGuire was shot with a .38 caliber gun. The weapon used in the Glass murder is a Smith & Wesson Ruger or Taurus .38 caliber and a .22 caliber RG revolver. Weapon used in the McGuire murder, also a Smith & Wesson Ruger Taurus .38 caliber weapon. The weapon used in the John Doe murder was an RG .22 caliber revolver, the same type of weapon used to kill the John Doe. Now, remember the canine hit on the center console of Nellie Sims's car, the elderly lady that lived with Bill Davis. There were gloves in there. The dog individually hit on those gloves for traces of gunpowder. There's no evidence to suggest that Nellie Sims had anything to do with any of these murders. And then, obviously, on the multiple warrants that I did at Bill Davis's home, I was able to recover .38 caliber ammunition, .22 caliber ammunition at his home, and some of the ammunition, the .38 caliber ammunition found at Davis's home, matched the manufacture and design of the .38 caliber bullet taken from the Glass murder, and the .22 caliber ammunition I found at a search warrant at Davis's house also matched the manufacture and design of the bullet taken from the John Doe in 2007. And don't forget that the actual murder weapon was found literally within arm's reach of the fence line of Bill Davis's home. So, look, I'm not making this up. Either Bill Davis did this, or he's absolutely the most unluckiest man ever to exist in the universe. You could make up your own mind. This is a case that it's just circumstantial evidence with tidbits of physical evidence. No one saw Bill Davis shoot anybody. Bill Davis never admitted to shooting anybody. In fact, he adamantly denied everything. There's no video that shows Davis running from the crime scene, but we have eyewitness testimony that saw a man running. They couldn't identify Bill Davis, but all of these pieces together is what allowed me, after 2 years, to finally sit down with a judge and say, hey, it's not going to get any better. This is as good as it's going to get. I did my job, and now it's up to a jury to come back and make a decision. Ultimately, and I've always been good with however that goes. Like, if this had gone to trial and if Bill Davis not died before trial, and they found him not guilty, I would have been okay with that. I did my job. I did what I had to do. At that point, I didn't think it was absent of a confession, which I didn't think I was going to get. There's not much else I thought I could do to get this case solved. So that's kind of the behind the scenes stuff for the serial killer next door case. There's other cases you're watching now that you're not going to get all the tidbits and all the juicy pieces, and we'll probably do another live for those to give you those extra bits. So I think my producer's telling me that prior to the live, we had some questions that were emailed to us. He's going to shoot a couple of those to me now, and then I think we're going to open this thing up for you guys to ask me some questions, and we'll see how that goes. Said. Yeah. Great question. So the question from someone who wrote in was Nellie Sims. Like, why would this salt to the earth 98-year-old woman who, after Bill Davis killed her adopted son, would allow him to come back, live with her, and continue to just thrive in the neighborhood at the expense of his neighbors? so to speak. I don't know the real answer to that, but I can tell you that I did get the opportunity to like really experience Nellie Sims. She was literally just a wonderful woman. Like when I spoke to her, she reminded me of my grandmother. She was so sweet, endearing, polite. And at 98 years old, I can't imagine some of the things that she's experienced. This is 2007, so go back to, the early 1900s. So not just racism, but all of the other things, the Great Depression. So there's so much, that this woman has experienced. I don't know what her motivation was. They may have had a companionship type of relationship where she just liked the company and didn't want to live alone, and I don't fault her for that. People forgive people for doing everything. I don't know that I don't know that she had full knowledge of everything Bill had done. Certainly, she started to understand things as I got involved because I had to interview her, and it was about homicides, and she knew that Bill was central to that investigation. But nevertheless, Bill remained there, and then once Nellie Sims died, Bill still wanted to profit from this relationship. If you remember one of the episodes, one of his major complaints was that the family wanted Bill out of the house, and he wasn't going to get anything from the will. So, to the best of my knowledge, I think she was just a woman who's, at the end of her lifespan and just enjoyed the company of somebody around her. It's the only thing I could think. But there was nothing that Nellie Sims ever did that led me to believe that she was covering up for Bill, or trying to dissuade me from doing anything, or trying to push me in a direction that wasn't, true or just. And I have nothing but, respect for that woman. Got another question. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so sorry for laughing. This isn't funny. We're going to talk about when Bill died. I apologize. It's not funny. The circumstances of how I got injected into that can be a little humorous, and you got to realize in homicide cases, in the world of working homicide, it's a very dark place to be. You are constantly dealing with death. You're constantly dealing with sorrow. You're dealing with family members who, just experienced the worst day of their lives. We take a lot of that weight on, and we find opportunities to lighten the load a little bit, and sometimes that's with humor. So Bill Davis, as you remember, I arrested him, and as we're waiting for trial months later, I get a call from the prosecutor who says, you got to meet us at the hospital. Bill and his defense attorney, who was a very, very well-respected defense attorney. I won't name her, but if I ever got in trouble, I would certainly have her defend me. Very capable, and I had nothing but respect for her. But nevertheless, it was reported that Bill Davis from the jail, had entered into this catatonic state where he just wasn't communicating, staring off into space, staring at the ceiling. So they transferred him to our local hospital in custody, and they wanted us to come there in person so we could see for ourselves. Now, remember, I've been dealing with Bill Davis for 2 years, this cat and mouse. My initial thought, visceral response was, this is just another ploy of Bill Davis to try to get out of this somehow. So when I get there, he's in the hospital room. There's a corrections guard there with him. He had been there for some hours. I met the prosecutor and the defense attorney, and I asked the guard how long. I had her step out and asked her how long had he been like that. She had come on shift about 6 hours earlier and said since she's been there, he's just been staring at the ceiling. So we now enter the room, and as we entered the room, as we're talking, I'm talking to the prosecutor and the defense attorney. Bill heard my voice. And when he heard my voice, he stopped staring at the ceiling and just looked over at me and us. And then went right back to staring at the ceiling. So at that point, I was convinced, okay, see, he remembers my voice. He responded to the sound of my voice. He's been hearing my voice for 2 years. So I wasn't convinced. We all left, and we just said, well, let's see what happens. And it was a day or two later, I get a call from the prosecutor who told me that that he died. He actually died. So in a joking way, she said that I killed him when he heard my voice. Now, hey, look, I don't buy that. I'm not owning that. I was there doing my due diligence. I was upholding the oath I took to enforce the laws of the state of Georgia. I rest my head easy knowing I just did my job. And I was very sorry to hear that he passed away. I don't want anyone to die, but I was more sorry for the families who never got their day in court to actually hear the evidence, to see the process, and then see someone take responsibility for killing their loved ones. So that was a tragedy for them. So they were never able to get their day in court. But I did not kill Bill. Promise you. So questions in the chat. Let's see what we got here. Okay, a question in the chat was this one of my most frustrating cases because of the length it took and because it had to be so close to Bill? The answer is yes. It's almost like we're playing a game where we both know the answer to the question, but we're pretending that we don't. And that's extremely frustrating. It takes a lot of social skills to go through that exercise with Bill every single time that we meet. And me, trying to be proactive in finding ways to see if he would admit something or slip up in his timeline or say something contrary to what he said before. So it was very frustrating. But at the same time, I knew that this was a long haul. I knew that this investigation was going to take a long time. And that's the reason I chose to go at Bill alone. We vetted this through the command structure and my colleagues and my superiors. And I said, look, I've got to build a relationship with him. I've got to be able to, understand evidence and not just build a relationship with Bill, but build a relationship with the community around where Bill lives. If you remember, right, the frustrating part is, dealing with him for 2 years, but I'm also connecting with neighbors. And if you remember, it was the neighbor next door, the elderly woman that lived next door to Bill, who called me on a frantic Saturday in January. Because I said, if you ever see anything out of place, if you see or hear anything next door with Mr. Davis, call me. She found that gun and knew exactly I was the person that she needed to call. So, and if you remember, that's the same house, same woman who had a son, an adult son, who was a Vietnam veteran who heard voices that told him to kill people. He was also a suspect, but no evidence. There's absolutely no other evidence connecting him to any of the homicides. But this is a woman who potentially could be offering me the murder weapon that her son may have used to kill these victims, because he was not alibied out just yet. And she still, because of the relationship building that I experienced with her, she knew she had to do the right thing. She could have easily thrown that gun away, transported it somewhere, threw it in a lake, or had someone get rid of it, and we probably wouldn't be talking about this case today. So another question is, why? Why did Bill, what's the motive here? If we go back down Bill's timeline, let's start way before Kenneth Ellis was killed. Let's go back to when he lived in Ohio. In the 70s, 2 teenage kids he suspected of stealing from him. He's chasing them down the street, shooting at them. Now you fast forward to 1986 when he kills Kenneth Ellis. If you remember, he shot Kenneth Ellis twice. The first time he shot Kenneth Ellis, he didn't die, he lived. I think he shot him in the shoulder. He goes to the hospital, comes back, moves back into the home with Bill Davis and Nellie Sims. Bill Davis then suspects him of stealing something from his room. Same kind of idea that happened in Ohio, and then ends up killing him. Now, looking at the crime scene photos, and we didn't really talk about this, and this is a great question. When I look at the Kenneth Ellis crime scene photos, in my opinion, there's a knife in his hand. It looks staged. Very easy to do after you kill somebody, put a knife in their hand. So now, in 2 incidences, the 70s and the 80s, someone did Bill wrong, and he has retribution. So now we go back to the Glass murder. He had made inappropriate comments to Glass's daughter. Glass went over and confronted Bill Davis to tell him, leave my family alone. Don't have anything to do with us. Leave us alone. Don't talk to my daughter. And next thing you know, Alfred Glass is killed. He did him wrong. Talked to him dirty. Disrespected him. So now we go to the person next door, John Doe. For whatever reason, I couldn't really dial in, but that family was very weary. I would suspect that there was probably some words exchanged between John Doe and Bill Davis, and Bill Davis felt disrespected and got his retribution. Now let's go to Dennis McGuire in November of 2007. It was demonstrated by the wife that Bill Davis had brought somebody over the house to help him do some handiwork, and the McGuires were really upset about that. And Dennis McGuire had some very harsh words with Bill about that, and also would sometimes talk down to him because he couldn't hear. So now it's another area where disrespect was demonstrated. And now let's go to Warren Williams, killed 7 months later, the guy that lived right behind him. According to that victim's surviving cousin, he had done some cabinet work with Bill Davis earlier in the week, and when he got home, Warren Williams was clearly distraught and tells his cousin, there's something wrong with that guy, and I'm going to stay clear of him. So each incident that happened, there's some clear indication that somebody disrespected Bill or made him feel a certain way, and his way of dealing with that stress, his way of, basically processing that is to kill him. And that's exactly what, in my opinion, what he did. So that was a great question. Great question. So I think I'm going to take 2 more questions, and then I'm going to let you guys have your time back, let you finish your Wednesday night. Did you guys see that video of the police officer that was testifying via Zoom recently? It's like 2 weeks ago, or maybe a week ago. I know some of y'all know what I'm talking about. The judge is on the bench. The cop is in his living room, and he's testifying via electronic Zoom, I guess, for the court. And the judge, his camera's tilted down, the cop, and he's got no pants on. Did you guys remember that? Did you see this? Okay, this is hilarious. If you haven't seen it, go Google this. And the judge says, officer, are you wearing pants? And he just said no. He said no. And then he just turned his camera up. Anyway, I'm wearing pants. I'm just letting y'all know. I totally got pants on. I have sweatpants on, I promise you. But, all right, I'm going to take 2 more questions, and I'm going to give you your time back. And let's go. What you got? Ooh, what the question is? Yeah, the question is, what would I do to decompress while working so many homicides after the day is over? There's a couple stages of my life. I was a dad raising my son, so I took great joy and pleasure in just doing things with my son, like the park or going to movies. My son and I went to a ton of movies. Like, we would love to go watch scary movies. So that for me was part of my decompression. But then as he got older, things changed, and he's got his own life. He's an adult, and as I'm still working cases, I love to travel. I spend time with family. As many of you may know, I have always had a pet. Would take my dog to different places. But travel is really my number one, my go-to. This really lets me disconnect. It's hard to relax if you're a homicide detective in your home city, because that phone's going to ring at any minute. Even if you're not on call, you're always on call. But I know this: if I'm in the Maldives or I'm on a beach in Puerto Rico and my phone rings, good luck, because I'm not I'm not available. So it's a sense of like relaxation that I don't get to experience at home. So those are the 2 things that really and even to this day, travel. I work I do many different things. So I find pleasure in travel, family, friends. So last question, and I'll let you guys have your time. Okay, last question. What drove me to want to become a homicide detective? Well, I mentioned puzzles earlier. I use that as an example, the sailboat on the water. I've always been interested in taking things apart and putting them back together. I thought my calling was actually being a mechanic, like taking mechanisms and machines apart. I used to help my grandfather like break down the lawnmower and put it back together. And sometimes I would just tinker with stuff. And then, of course, the natural progression. I was in the military and started to fix airplanes. So the idea of putting things together, fixing things, but it really wasn't my passion. I've always been interested in law enforcement. And once I took that giant leap, I knew the only place that I would really be happy and make a difference is if I could take things apart or put them back together in some form or fashion. And for me, that meant working a homicide. And really, it's just like taking a piece of machinery apart or finding a bunch of parts to a machine without the blueprint and trying to put them together. So when you press the button, the engine starts, or you put this case together and when all the evidence fits, like all of this right here, all of these items that I just went over with Bill Davis, it creates a beautiful machine. That machine being an arrest warrant for the person who killed somebody. So I want to thank you guys. This was our first live. I want to remind you also two things. This live is for everyone. Anyone that subscribes to our channel, this is for you right now. Any future lives are going to be for memberships only. So if you want to catch the behind the scenes and all the crazy details, tune in with us to the lives. Become a member today. And then the last thing I want to say is that, we do sell merch. And our merch, a percentage of our sales go to the Atlanta Victim Assistance Incorporated here in Atlanta. It's an organization that's dear to my heart. I'm a board member, and they help surviving victims and family members deal with the trauma of not just homicides, but sexual assault. They have school programs, you name it. They are involved in the community. So we donate a percentage of every sale to that. And if you want, it's atlantavictimassistance.org. You can go to the website. You can actually make a donation just without buying merch. So it really isn't about the merch. But if you want our merch, it's really good. We got some good t-shirts, hats, and hoodies. So that's it. I think this was great. I really enjoyed talking to you guys, giving you some insight. And we're going to see you soon. I can't tell you exactly when the next live is going to be. But it'll be soon, and it's going to be good. We may even do a live on a current case that's in the media. I may break it down. Not even a case I worked. So let's see. We can have fun with this thing. So in the meantime, enjoy your Wednesday night. God bless, and I thank you wholeheartedly for watching.